Well, hi everyone. Election season is certainly upon us, isn't it? And it is quite the season. I know most of us really feel the political tension that surrounds us and the weight of the decisions in which we're called to participate. And as often happens in this season, I know we're kind of all reaching out to one another and looking for information about how to make wise decisions that align with our Christian values. And several folks have reached out with questions about everything from amendments to judges to the presidential race. And so here's what I hope will be an encouragement and a help and perhaps a challenge in this election season. Folks, if you're a Christian, this does not have to be stressful because number one, we vote according to biblical principle. We have a standard that is higher and separate from our own opinions and our own preferences. And so we seek to align ourselves with that biblical standard. And secondly, we trust in a sovereign God who raises up and puts down both kings and nations to accomplish his good plan. As John Quincy Adams so succinctly put it centuries ago, duty is ours, results are his. Of course, for many of us, the confusion is over the many decisions that we're called to make in this moment. It's a long ballot, and some of that's exactly the problem. There are actually decisions that are put before the electorate that really shouldn't be put there, but that's a class for another day. So the amendments are an example of that, but nevertheless, here we are with ballot in hand and in need of some solid guidance. So I have a first valuable source to recommend. If you need help voting on whether to retain particular judges, the Florida Family Policy Council has done extensive research on those folks, and they provide an endorsement guide that I'm linking to in the written blog. They've done the same thing for United States House candidates, as well as the Florida Senate and the Florida House and all of the proposed amendments to the Florida Constitution. So as to the amendments, I would love to spend time really parsing those and talking through the principles that are behind the recommended votes on each of them. I'm not going to take time to do that in this video, but just know that I am in total agreement with the Florida Family Policy Council positions on the amendments. And if you would like a further explanation on any of the undergirding principles for those recommendations, I'm happy to chat with you separately or post a comment later on my blog. Another really valuable resource that you might consider if you're confused about who to vote for, what to vote for, which presidential candidate to choose, would be the party platforms themselves. I'm going to link to those as well in my written blog, both the Democrat Party platform and the Republican Party platform. Guys, they tell you what they stand for. Believe them. Now, if it's the presidential choice that has you all flustered, I just want to say don't be flustered. I want to tackle head on the first objection that I've been hearing. Does Donald Trump's character disqualify him? Now, many of you have taken classes with me, and you'll recall there's a Hugo Grotius quote that I love and I use. It discusses the qualities of leaders, and it starts out with, a man knows not how to rule a kingdom unless he knows how to manage a province. And then it continues all the way down to the local level and to his family. And ultimately, that a man should be ruled by reason, with his reason ruled by God and obedient to him. So clearly, that is the ideal for which we should strive. Levels of proven leadership that are built on a foundation of self-government. The character of our leaders absolutely does matter, and we should be seeking out the best candidates possible. With that said, I'd like to offer 3 thoughts on that front. First, I agree with noted seminary professor and author Wayne Grudem. He wrote this, among other things, Politics According to the Bible. And Wayne Grudem has this to say: the president is sometimes egotistical, bombastic, and brash. He often lacks nuance in his statements. Sometimes he blurts out mistaken ideas that he later must abandon. He insults people. He can be vindictive when people attack him. All of that's from Grudem's letter to an anti-Trump Christian friend, also helpful and linked in my blog. Of course, none of those things are preferred qualities in a leader, but they are not disqualifying factors either. At the same time, our alternative, the former vice president, has been repeatedly linked to international corruption that actually endangers the safety of our nation. He's been plausibly accused of gross sexual misconduct, has maintained friendships with avowed racists, and himself made offensive statements to and about the Black community. Quite frankly, this is an indictment of us, because in a republic, the representatives of the people are a reflection of them. And Christians have largely abandoned their duties on the field of civil government. So it's no wonder that the character of our candidates isn't really what we desire. So moving forward, it is time to educate ourselves and re-engage. Second, actions and policies do matter, and we do have to choose. We are stewarding a vote for a package deal, a leader, and the policies that come with him. Incredibly anti-biblical and destructive policies are what disqualify a candidate. While historic advancements in policies and positions that are consistent with a biblical view of man and civil government, those have to be the strongest endorsement for a candidate and reveal the candidate's most closely held values. That's what we need to examine. Third, voting third party or not at all is, in this every vote counts scenario, a vote for something. So I hope you'll hear me out and allow me to make the case for truly honoring God with your vote. So again, we are to vote according to biblical principle, right? Well, our biggest problem is that we are a nation of people that have been not taught. We don't actually know the biblical principles that should guide our decisions. So folks, it's not an emotional decision. It is not a popularity contest. It's not about who supposedly has empathy, and it's not about, as the media often asks, who you'd like to have a beer with. As Christians, we are called to vote according to God's guidelines for civil government. So let me try to quickly lay out a few. Number one, civil government has a limited jurisdiction according to Scripture. It's created by the people, accountable to the people, and to serve the people by upholding righteous law and protecting its citizens and their lives, liberty, and property from violence, either foreign or domestic. It breaks down to this: protection and justice under law. That's it. Nothing else. Not education, not healthcare, not welfare, not housing, nothing else. One of the primary principles that I teach, and I had to learn myself, is that God ordained 4 legitimate spheres of government, and each one is sovereign in its own right. Each has unique authorities, and with those authority, responsibilities. They are the individual, the family, the church, and the civil sphere. That should look familiar if you've been in my class. When the spheres are functioning as they should, liberty is the result. That's what we see here on the right. But when one transgresses into the jurisdiction of another, liberty is lost, and we move closer towards a situation of bondage. One of the real miracles of America was the establishment of a system of civil government that was designed to be limited in its function in order to protect the functioning of those other vital spheres. Healthcare, welfare, housing, education, none of those things properly belong in the civil sphere. They belong to individuals and families and churches, and the more that we ask civil government to do in that regard, the more liberty is lost, and the more a secular standard that's ensconced here in civil government will be shaped by whoever's in charge at the moment, and it influences all of those other areas. It's disastrous. As Christians, we should be working to restore the rights and responsibilities of individual, family, and church. We should be working to restore this proper balance that leads to liberty. So the question is, which candidate or party will move us towards more independence from civil government and the restoration of the local church, family, and individuals' authority over healthcare and education and whatever else? And which candidate has embraced a massive and dangerous expansion of the role of civil government? Number 2, civil government is to protect property. As I mentioned a moment ago, the role of civil government is the protection of God-given inalienable rights of those that put it together. So our founders defined those rights as life, liberty, and property. And I know that we're not used to hearing life, liberty, and property, but they certainly were. That term sounds strange to our ears today, but it shouldn't, because they recognized a vital truth. Property is vital and biblical and necessary in order for the individual and the family and the church to meet their biblical responsibilities. We must have property in order to care for the needy, or to provide for our own families, as is commanded by Scripture, or to tithe to our church. We will give an answer one day as to how we've stewarded the property for which we've labored. So we have to ask, which candidate is promoting ideas that strengthen your ability to steward your own property by taking less? For example, by maintaining the tax cuts that have been put in place. Which candidate is focused on reducing inappropriate overregulation of business, enabling you again to steward more of your own property? Number 3, civil government is not to steal. Controlling your own property, which is a biblical idea, is entirely different than choosing a candidate who's focused on giving you free stuff or penalizing the rich in order to benefit the common good. That's not biblical. That is socialism. And at bottom, it is covetousness and theft. This may sound harsh, but it is a truth we have to understand. The civil government, guys, is the only sphere to which God has given the power of the sword. It's talked about in Scripture. It does not bear the sword in vain. But that's also why civil government must be restricted to the functions which require the sword: upholding the law, protecting the people, period. When it exceeds its sphere, when it balloons into programs that encourage free college or free health care or anything else, it becomes an existential threat to the other spheres because it's now using the sword for wrong purposes. Follow me here. Civil government produces nothing. Property is labored for and produced by individuals and families. Civil government only has what it takes from those other spheres, and it's entitled to take a small amount in order to properly execute its limited duties of protection and justice. But beyond that, when we start to use our vote to ask civil government to provide free anything, well, we haven't technically gone to the nicer subdivision down the road and held our neighbors at gunpoint until they delivered college tuition money, but in practice, we have done exactly that. We've just used the civil government's sword to do it for us. This is covetousness and theft, breaking the 8th and 10th commandments. So as you consider your vote, we have to ask which candidate is promising free stuff at the expense of others. Number 4, civil government is to protect the other spheres, including the church, not tyrannize it. It has been the mark of every totalitarian regime in history that Christ's church is persecuted, while it has been the incredible distinction of America to establish for the first time in history the protection of religious expression in an unprecedented way. My fear is that having grown up with this unique liberty, generations of Americans just take it for granted. But in recent years, Christian beliefs have come under increasing and rapidly escalating attacks. Pastors are being pressured to be silent on biblical sexuality, family structure, the protection of the unborn. Faith-based organizations and faithful Christians have been sued over their refusal to compromise conscience. In recent months, while Governor DeSantis never shut down our Florida churches, remember how close we came to having a different leader in place who would likely have handled things very differently. Every vote matters. In many cities and states around the country, churches and synagogues have been intensely targeted. It is no secret that these have been primarily Democrat-controlled states and cities like New York, California, Illinois, Maine, and Wisconsin. Prominent problem areas. In Chicago, you may have read about the Elim Romanian Pentecostal Church, where they have experienced targeted discrimination at the hands of the mayor there, Lori Lightfoot, and the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. Now, the story of God's providence in their defense is really remarkable, and I'm going to link you, in case you want to read a little bit more about that, to Liberty Counsel's website. It's really a wonderful story. But this case is now going to become the very first church restrictions case to go before the Supreme Court for a full review. And according to Liberty Counsel, who will argue this case in front of the Supreme Court, it is among the most important they have ever tried. A quote from their website. A Supreme Court ruling would determine whether religious freedom will remain free in America. Should this case go the wrong way, Ceausescu-like socialist tyrants in the United States will be able to shutter churches and silence Christians anytime they please. America's religious freedom is on the line, and we cannot afford to lose. So as you consider your presidential vote, we have to ask, which candidate or party supports religious freedom and originalist judges, and which candidate or party repeatedly seeks to suppress Christianity and its beliefs? Number 5, communism, socialism, and the methodologies that they employ are not neutral. They are deceptive, evil, anti-biblical, and have resulted in more than 150 million deaths in the last century. So those are strong words for, oh, it's just another approach to government, right? No. True socialism, true totalitarian communism, which is what's being advocated today, is not just another government option. And unbelievably, it has crept deceptively into every part of our culture through very intentional efforts of cultural Marxists. It is an existential threat. It's become very evident to us in the last months. It's evident in cancel culture, in the high-pressure political correctness that surrounds us, the redefining of words and human biology, the undermining of the rule of law that gives stability to our society. It's evident in the lawlessness that we have witnessed in our streets in recent months. Guys, I know that we kind of all like to just forget because things have quieted down, right? We'd like to imagine that that was just a one-off and just get back to our lives, but we do so at our peril. This is something we have to think about and weigh as we place our vote. In Marxist and communist ideology, conflict and violent clashes are part of the necessary process for progress. Anarchy and lawlessness, while they won't be tolerated long-term in any totalitarian regime, but they're strategies that are used to destabilize the culture and justify abandoning founding principles in favor of the brave new world. Communist causes are being couched in emotional terms which Christians have been often confused by and taken in by. Black Lives Matter, anti-fascism, empathy. Who would not support such noble ideas, right? But don't be fooled, because those slogans cloak an intolerant, anti-liberty, evil ideology. The enemy is at the gates, folks. It is serious. They are not even hiding it. BLM has told us, it was posted on their website until recently, that their desire is to break down the traditional nuclear family and biblical sexuality. Antifa openly advocates for anarchy and communism. And yes, they're opposite ends of the political spectrum, but remember there's a method to that madness. We have moved from just tolerate this anti-biblical belief to just provide equality for this anti-biblical belief, to you must applaud this anti-biblical belief. Kneel, say the name. Using the term sexual preference rather than orientation is now hate speech. Guys, please don't forget the very recent displays of this madness that we have seen for months on end, and ask yourself which party is embraced by these movements and which party is opposed by them. Finally, and most importantly, the highest duty of civil government is to protect life. And there's a clear division between parties and presidential candidates on this decisive issue. And quite frankly, a spiritual battle rages in this country on that front. This is really all you need to know. which candidate and party consistently protects and fights for the unborn, and which consistently fights for the opportunity to kill a baby up until the very moment of birth. The reality of this horror made it hard for me to even type those words. This one to me is an absolute no-brainer, and yet there are Christian leaders who have proposed that the more important considerations are, and I quote, democratic proposals that would significantly alleviate the financial burden, accessible health services for all citizens, affordable child care, and a minimum wage that lifts workers out of poverty. That's from pro-life evangelicals for Biden. Guys, these are not civil government roles. They are not biblically based. Rather, it is the advancement of a socialist agenda under the guise of Christian compassion and at the expense of a proper biblical role of standing for life, defending the defenseless. We get taken in by this because we don't know the proper role of civil government, and we're deceived into voting for policies that will actually bring judgment and destruction. When church leaders actively invite civil government to take over what should be areas of authority and responsibility for families, individuals, and churches, and to abandon their proper role, they have, knowingly or not, abandoned the proper stewardship of the church and become false shepherds, leading their people into bondage under what will be a socialized and secularized civil government devoid of any godly standard. I'm reminded of Paul's warning to the Colossians. He said, "See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the traditions of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ." Isn't that amazing? Because we easily forget that philosophy matters. Ideas matter because ideas shape thinking, which shape policies, which shape actions, which shape lives. It's life or death. Ideas have consequences, and wrong ideas can and have had deadly ones. The founders of America regularly spoke of the fact that resistance to tyrants was obedience to God. In fact, it was suggested as our national motto. I want you to follow the reasoning. It was that man had been given by his creator unalienable rights, which are accompanied by corresponding duties. So to not act or vote in defense of those God-given rights of life, liberty, and property would be disloyalty to the God who'd given them to you. To choose tyrannical and unbiblical ideas, which would result in the abuse of those gifts, would be an act of treason against the King of Kings, who calls us to steward everything that he's entrusted to us for his glory, and to pass those liberties on untarnished to the next generation. So please remember, it is not a popularity contest. It's not about who supposedly has empathy. It's not about who you want to have a beer with. We, number one, do our duty to vote according to biblical principle. And then on November 3rd and always, we, number two, remember that we trust in a sovereign God who raises up and puts down kings and nations to accomplish his good plan. Duty is ours. Results are his.